Welcome everyone to Gamer Meld. Today, Intel's 11th gen CPUs have been released and the reviews are in. And in honor of Intel's incredible ability to stretch their 14nm process all the way to 2021, I am reintroducing the 14nm plus Infinity mug. And well, I've had this for quite a while. That's actually Coke. I don't care for coffee, but they are pretty sweet. They do last, and if you want them to last even longer, I also have this 14nm Infinity enamel mug. Check those out at store.gamermeld.com. Once again, that's store.gamermeld.com. Also, I'll be going back to my normal video style in my next video. In the meantime, today brings us mining with a Gameboy. Cyberpunk adds ray tracing for AMD GPUs. RX 6600, Nvidia gives us free performance, and do not buy Intel's 11th gen CPUs. Okay, first up for today, we have a new report from Tweaktown, and apparently someone actually modded an original Game Boy to mine Bitcoin. Basically, you've seen it all, and we've reached peak mining. What is fairly interesting is the fact that after all this was done, it only got a whopping 0.8 hashes, not mega hashes, hashes per second. And as they state, when you compare that to a current gen ASIC miner, pumps up around 100 terahashes per second, the Game Boy is 125 trillion times slower, at least at Bitcoin with ASIC miners. Now, obviously this is an ASIC miner. If you used a normal GPU, it would be significantly less than 100 terahashes, but it would be incredibly more than the Game Boy. I will say that I do find it really interesting kind of just to see how far things have advanced as far as technology in such a short period of time, and this definitely does show that off. Next up, Cyberpunk 2077 has officially released their new 1.2 update, and it looks like it actually does a ton of things. For one, they fixed a massive amount of bugs. Look at all of this. Fixed missing UI dialogue elements during this, environment levels, unbelievable amounts. So if you are still interested in that, hopefully this is, enough of those bugs fixed to actually make it more or less playable. But one main feature of this is that it actually adds ray tracing to AMD GPUs. I will say that I may actually test that out. If you want to see something like that, let me know down in the comments below. Anyway, next up for today, in a new driver that was issued for the Linux kernel HSA, it looks like AMD inadvertently unveiled how much Infinity cache their upcoming Navi 23, so RX 6600 GPUs are gonna have. And if you're looking at this, it pretty much is 32. And if you know anything about the Infinity caches of the other, like Navi 21 being 128, it is a significant drop. Though, to be honest, I never even really saw Infinity cache being something necessary for the lower end GPUs anyway, just because that was something AMD needed to do so they could have faster memory on the higher end products instead of using GDDR6X that Nvidia uses. As you know, most of Nvidia's lower end models use regular GDDR6 anyway, and I do believe Navi 23 is going to be using GDDR6, so while it is kind of discussed as being very, very little, I don't really see the need for it anyway. Either way, that little bit is at least fairly interesting. And next up, Nvidia has officially announced that they've added resizable bar support to their entire RTX 30 series of GPUs and laptops. Well, GPUs and the laptops, so you really could just say graphics cards, but either way, their entire RTX 30 series has officially gotten it, and according to Nvidia, they're showing upwards of 12%. They clearly, I have no doubt, showed some that, are going to show kind of the best case scenarios. So we're looking at upwards of around 10% at best, though of course free performance is free performance. And I will say that we already have some testing from a user in the Chip Hell forums and what they gathered using the RTX 3090. Now, maybe the 3080 gets a bit more performance than the 3090 when adding resizable bar. It only got about 3.17% on average at 4K. So nothing huge, nothing to write home about, but at the same time, like I said, free performance is free performance. And lastly for today, Intel has officially released their 11th gen CPUs. And well, hold on. That is good, store.gamermail.com. Okay. So 11th gen CPUs. So if you've been following the news on this, you know that Intel technically released their CPUs a little while back for pre-order, but the embargo on the reviews wasn't going to be lifted until Intel actually released the CPUs today. And now we know why. They're bad. Well, sort of. Though even if you're looking at one of the SKUs that I personally consider to be fairly decent, and there are some, I do not suggest buying 11th gen CPUs, any of them. And I'll get to why that is in just a second. First, let's get to the performance. And first up, this right here is actually from Tom's Hardware, and it's pretty interesting because it actually shows IPC performance across Ryzen and then 10th gen and 11th gen CPUs. And you can see at least in Cinebench, remember that IPC increase, a lot of people don't really know this, but IPC increase is 100% application dependent. Some changes that are done will help some applications, hurt some others, not really have a big difference, but overall you obviously do aim for a higher IPC, but in this case, Cinebench R20, Tom's Hardware actually set the clock at the exact same at 3.8 gigahertz and used a single thread, so it doesn't matter if it's a 12-core CPU, 86 cores, it doesn't matter. But either way, as you can see, the 11900K did in fact get a fairly decent IPC increase, at least in this, over 10th gen CPUs. So this is showing that new core, and it is a decent IPC increase if it weren't for the fact that it's been many years. So with that said, let's get to actual performance. And I want to go ahead and show this one off right here. This is single core performance. You can see that the 11900K absolutely is doing quite a bit better and actually even beats the 5950X, at least right here in single core performance. When we move over to gaming, and I will say I'm going to show some other outlets besides Tom's Hardware, I just really like theirs because they will actually do an average of all of their games that they tested, so you can actually get a decent picture of how good something is with a single graph. And right here you can see that the 11900K at its best actually loses to the 5900X. Though really I would say that they're fairly neck and neck just because Intel wins some and AMD wins others. So you might be thinking, well, the 11900K is cheaper, so what's the issue? Well, don't forget that that price is actually based on Intel's US dollar per 1000. Now, I don't blame Tom's Hardware for using that because that's really the only thing Intel gives us. Not only that, but a lot of times it actually can be right at that price, except this time it is not. You can see that the 11900K right now is selling for $613.99, sold by Newegg, and they are in fact sold out. But either way, right now at $613.99, it definitely makes the 5900X look better. Though of course some will argue that you can't get the 5900X, but you can't get the 11900K either. But really, even if the 11900K does lower to right around that price, I still don't suggest it. And this is one of the reasons why. We can see right here that Tech Power Up shows, now this is Prime 95, so it's going to be one of the worst case scenarios, but even in Cinebench, the 11900K gets up to 419 watts. 419. Of course, you aren't going to be getting that high in most scenarios, but for professional workloads, if you're going to be using a lot of those cores, I would definitely argue the 5900X is well worth it when at MSRP. Another issue is the fact that, don't forget, this is an 8-core CPU. Yes, with the higher clocks and the IPC increase, Intel was able to, for the most part, get it to where it's decent enough compared to their 10-core 10900K, but when it comes to AMD's 12-core 5900X, it is not. As you can see in most multi-core benchmarks, the Ryzen 9 5900X flat out wins. Now this is single core performance, so I do want to point out it's decent there, although it still technically loses, at least at floating point integer. The 11900K does do better, but in most things that are going to be using all of those cores, the simple fact is that the 5900X completely crushes the 11900K. And you can actually see that right here, the 10900K still wins, at least when we're talking multi-core performance. You can see the single thread is significantly less. And moving on, both compression and decompression, the 5900X and 7-zip absolutely decimates the 11900K. This is 7-zip once again. You can see such a massive difference here. Adobe Premiere Pro, though I will say there are some things that Intel simply does better, primarily because of their architecture versus AMD's. And if you are someone who uses those applications, definitely get Intel over AMD. But for the most part and for most professional workloads, there's no reason to get the 11900K over the 5900X. Now, with that said, like I said earlier, there are some positives, specifically the 11600K. So as you can see, the 11600K at 5 gigahertz is right at the 5600X. It's actually neck and neck, but when the 5600X is used with Precision Boost Overdrive, you can see that it jumps by quite a bit. I mean, that matters. But when we look at pricing, you can see that the 11600K is $262, but obviously that doesn't always mean anything, except this time it is really close at $269. So while the 5600X is ultimately a winner, though, once again, a lot of times they are kind of switching back and forth. Personally, I will suggest the 11600K over the 5600X, how it's priced right now, and really even how it's priced MSRP. The simple fact is that it is a good buy, but I've already said that you should not buy 11th gen. So why is that? Well, that's because Intel has already announced that they're planning to launch their 12th gen Alder Lake this year. Yes, 11th gen does use a new core, but it's still running on the 14 nanometer process. That's holding it back significantly, store.gamermeld.com. But their 12th gen Alder Lake is finally moving down to 10 nanometers, and it's getting a full new architectural design using the big dot little philosophy. Now, I'm still somewhat on the edge at how big dot little is going to work when you're doing more professional workloads. They use all of those cores, but we have seen that it's getting a massive IPC increase, and don't forget that it still is 8 big cores and 8 little cores for a total of 16. So we'll definitely have to see just how well it does, but it absolutely should do significantly better than this. Of course, if you are wanting to buy this right now, I do understand, and for a gaming CPU, I definitely suggest the 11600K, to which I will have in the description as an affiliate link. It won't cost you anything more, but personally, I do suggest waiting. Now, talking 10 nanometers with Alder Lake, obviously, Intel has been known for pushing back releases, but so far, it really does look like it's going to be coming out at the end of this year. So hold out if you can. I definitely suggest it. So anyway, I hope you liked the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And as always, have a great day.